Welcome to Secrets of History, where the past doesn't just whisper, it awakens. Here, buried truths rise from the dust, shadows speak in forgotten tongues, and every mystery dares you to look deeper. Step inside, where history reveals the darkness it tried to hide. In a picture-perfect American town, a single family held the office of mayor for over a century. But this wasn't tradition, it was a ritual. And the secret to their power lies buried in a vault, sealed with a warning that chills to the bone: we serve still. This is the story they don't want told. Subscribe to Secrets of History, and help us uncover the truth before the past buries us for good. In the quiet heart of Pennsylvania lies a town the maps refuse to forget, yet history itself has tried to erase. To the passerby, its picturesque white fences, brick courthouses, and the scent of old magnolias. But beneath that beauty runs a lineage so powerful, so unnervingly persistent, that for more than a century, every mayor bore the same name: Blackridge. Locals used to smile when asked about it: just tradition, they'd say. But the longer you stay, the more you notice the unease. The way people lower their voices when the family is mentioned. The way lights in the old mansion burn through the night even when the windows are empty. Town records tell a different story. Election logs missing entire decades. Journalists who arrived to investigate, only to leave suddenly, abandoning their notes. Fires consuming archives. And still, the name persisted, carved into buildings, stitched into flags, etched across tombstones that all bear the same cryptic phrase: we serve still. Whispers claim the Blackridges didn't just lead the town, they owned its will. From the courthouse to the church pews, every promise, every sermon, every decision traced back to them. It wasn't politics. It was ritual. And somewhere, hidden in the town's oldest vault, lies the secret that explains how one family held a community captive for generations, and why no one dared to break the cycle. Because in Blackridge Hollow, power isn't elected. It's inherited. A small American town shrouded in wealth, respectability, and fear presents the perfect illusion of peace. On the surface, it is a portrait of order: white-trimmed houses lining cobblestone streets, the clock tower tolling at noon, children playing under the shade of century-old oaks. Visitors often remark how untouched it feels, as though time itself hesitates to move forward here. But behind this postcard serenity lies something far older, colder, and infinitely more deliberate: a legacy woven into the town's foundations long before most families even settled here. Those who live in its shadow know that certain names carry weight, and among them, none are heavier than Blackridge. Their name echoes from every plaque, every building, every whispered conversation that dies the moment a stranger draws near. This town was never simply built, it was orchestrated. The Blackridge Estate sits atop the highest hill, casting its silhouette over the church steeple and courthouse below. Every street seems to point toward it, like the veins of a living organism feeding its heart. Wealth flows through the town in precise channels, and every business that prospers does so under the family's quiet blessing. But that wealth comes with unspoken rules everyone follows without needing to be told. Merchants close their shops early when the old carriage passes through Main Street. Teachers adjust history lessons when the family's ancestors are mentioned. Even the mayor's office, a stately brick building near the square, still bears a gold-framed portrait of the first Blackridge patriarch, as if no one else ever truly led. Fear here is not loud or violent. It is polite, civil, and inherited. Generations have grown up learning which questions are safe to ask, which stories must be forgotten. Outsiders sometimes mistake this silence for small-town manners, but locals know better. They've seen what happens when curiosity crosses the invisible boundary between respect and intrusion. Mysterious illnesses, sudden fires, accidents without witnesses, all written off as coincidence, yet always circling the same name. Over time, people learned to smile in public and whisper in private. And still, no one leaves. The town is too prosperous, too orderly, too eerily perfect. Those who stay convince themselves the old stories are exaggerations, that every family has secrets, that every town has its myths. But beneath the calm surface lies an unbroken chain of influence, binding past and present in ways even the bravest hesitate to unravel. In this place, power wears the mask of tradition, and tradition, in turn, hides something darker. Every mayor for over a century carried the same last name, Blackridge, and in that fact alone lies the essence of the town's eerie continuity. From 1889 to 2003, the office changed hands countless times, yet the name on every document, every ballot, every framed photograph in the town hall remained unchanged. Generations of Blackridges stood behind the same mahogany desk, signing laws, approving budgets, and presiding over ceremonies that reinforced their place at the heart of civic life. What the townspeople called stability was, in truth, the unbroken reign of a single bloodline. It was presented as tradition, a harmless passing of responsibility from parent to child, but anyone who looked closer could sense that something deeper held the family in place, as though the town itself refused to accept any other ruler. In the beginning, no one questioned it. The first Blackridge mayor, Jonathan E. Blackridge, had been a war hero, a philanthropist, a man whose charisma carried the town through its early years. His leadership was so deeply revered that when his son took over, few dared to challenge it. What began as respect soon hardened into expectation. The ballots might have been printed every 4 years, but the outcome was never uncertain. Rival candidates withdrew before the election, newspapers praised the inevitable wisdom of the family's governance, and the townspeople convinced themselves that continuity equaled safety. After all, the Blackridges had kept the economy stable, crime low, and the town prosperous while neighboring regions faltered. The cost of that comfort, however, was silence. Over the decades, the family's presence became ritualized. The inauguration ceremony of each new mayor mirrored the last, word for word, gesture for gesture, as if replaying a performance written long ago. The same oak cane, passed from one Blackridge to the next, symbolized authority. The same vow, whispered beneath the courthouse dome, sealed each successor's fate. Town clerks noted how the air grew colder during these events, how the candles in the hall flickered even when no draft passed through. Some said the oath wasn't to the people, but to something older, something that watched over the town from beneath its foundations. By the time the last Blackridge mayor took office, no one alive could recall a time when another family had governed. The town's sense of identity was so entwined with theirs that opposing them felt like opposing the town itself. And yet, with every generation, the faces in those framed portraits grew paler, the eyes colder, the smiles thinner, as if the bloodline was not continuing, but decaying slowly, generation after generation, while still clinging to its unbroken hold on power. Locals called it tradition, but outsiders called it a bloodline government, and that difference in perception defined the town's strange existence. To those born and raised under the Blackridge shadow, it was simply the way things had always been. The name on the mayor's door, the crest on the courthouse seal, the same family voice giving the annual speech at Founders' Day, all of it was normal, comforting even. It represented continuity in a world that changed too quickly beyond the hills. But to travelers, reporters, and historians who stumbled upon the town's records, the repetition was unsettling. One family ruling for more than a century without a single disruption sounded less like democracy and more like quiet domination wrapped in heritage. The townspeople had learned to romanticize the family's influence. Teachers told school children stories of the first Blackridge, a man of vision who founded the town from nothing. Streets, schools, and parks bore the family's name, and every civic milestone was tied to one of their ancestors. This constant reinforcement created a shared mythology where questioning the Blackridges became equivalent to questioning the town's very soul. Outsiders saw it differently. They saw how that mythology replaced accountability. The elections, though still held, had become ceremonial, with ballots printed as a gesture rather than a choice. No one campaigned against the Blackridges because no one was allowed to imagine that they could. When visiting officials or journalists inquired about the dynasty, locals responded with polite defensiveness. It's tradition, they'd insist, as if the word alone could explain the eerie continuity. To them, the Blackridges were not rulers but guardians, the keepers of the town's prosperity. Yet beneath that loyalty lay fear, quiet and generational. Families taught their children not to speak against the name, not because of political consequence, but because of what might follow: bad luck, illness, fires that started without reason. Those who had once tried to challenge the family's control, decades ago, had either left abruptly or been erased from memory altogether. Their houses were bought out, their names removed from town records, their stories fading like whispers caught in the wind. Outsiders often described the town as beautiful but uncanny. Everything was too orderly, too preserved, as if frozen in time. Some claimed the town seemed to resist modernity itself, its charm masking a collective hypnosis. The Blackridge influence didn't just govern, it shaped thought, culture, and belief. To call it tradition was to give it a name that sounded harmless, respectable, even patriotic. But to anyone looking from the outside, it was clear that this was not tradition at all. It was inheritance disguised as democracy, and devotion forged through quiet fear. The Blackridge mansion sits on the highest hill overlooking the town, an ever-present silhouette against the horizon, its windows glowing faintly even when no one is said to be home. From a distance, it looks majestic, a relic of another century, with ivy crawling up its stone facade and iron gates that seem almost decorative. But for those who live in its shadow, the mansion is not a landmark, it is a reminder. It watches over everything: the streets, the courthouse, the river that divides the town, as if positioned deliberately to remind everyone who built this place and who still owns it. The glow from its upper windows has become a quiet superstition among locals. Some claim to see figures moving past the drapes long after midnight, though the current heirs live elsewhere. Others say the lights are never switched off because something inside must never be left in darkness. At night, the mansion appears alive in a way no abandoned structure should. The trees around it bend unnaturally toward the hill, their roots thick with age, as though drawn by something buried beneath. When the fog rolls in from the valley, it wraps around the estate, making it look suspended between worlds, half in the present, half trapped in the era when the first Blackridge patriarch built it. People who have been inside describe its halls as unnervingly silent, the air thick with a smell like old candle wax and wet stone. The portraits that line the walls watch with eyes that seem to follow movement, their paint cracked but still vivid. Each ancestor's face bears the same sharp features, the same faint smirk, as though painted by one unchanging hand over generations. There are parts of the mansion that townspeople say no one has entered in decades. The west wing remains locked, the keys kept in a safe at the courthouse under family control. Servants once whispered about a room sealed with red wax, its door covered with symbols etched into the wood. When questioned, the Blackridge descendants always give the same calm answer, that it's simply a storage area, unfit for visitors. Yet, the night guards posted around the property never seem to rotate, and their faces are never familiar to anyone in town. From the hill, the mansion's lights are visible from nearly every corner of the valley, like beacons marking invisible boundaries. The townspeople pretend not to notice, but they do. Every time the lamps flicker on at dusk, the air changes, conversations pause, and an unspoken awareness spreads through the streets. It is as if the house itself signals that night has fallen and that the Blackridges, whether present or not, are still watching. Town archives reveal a disturbing pattern of missing documents, sealed election records, and sudden accidents that seemed to alter the course of leadership at crucial moments. For a community that prided itself on order and transparency, The gaps in its historical record were far too frequent and far too precise to be accidental. Decades of council minutes were lost to unexplained fires, certain tax records vanished during renovations, and early voter rolls were found water-damaged beyond recognition, though stored in dry basements. The gaps always aligned with transitions of power just before or after a new Blackridge mayor took office. Clerks who attempted to reconstruct the lost files were quietly dismissed, while official statements insisted the destruction was unfortunate coincidence. Yet the pattern repeated itself over and over, erasing not just paper but memory, ensuring the Blackridge narrative remained uncontested. Those who worked close to the archives whispered about strange restrictions. Access to certain rooms in the town hall required written permission from the mayor, even for staff who had served for years. One clerk reported that sealed envelopes marked with the family crest were kept in the vault, guarded like relics. Each was labeled only with a year: 1911, 1937, 1962, the same years corresponding to unexplained deaths or political disappearances in town. When she asked what they contained, she was told never to mention them again. Months later, she left her post and moved away without notice, leaving her desk untouched, papers neatly stacked as if she intended to return. The most curious detail was the handling of election records. For nearly a century, the ballots were printed and stored locally, but no one outside the family ever counted them. The town's printer, who held the contract for decades, died in what the newspaper called a pressroom malfunction, and afterward, the printing was taken over by a company owned by a Blackridge cousin. Historians who later tried to piece together voter data found abrupt gaps in the archives, entire decades replaced with summaries handwritten by the mayors themselves. The handwriting shifted through generations, yet the tone remained identical, formal, emotionless, claiming smooth elections and record-breaking turnouts that no one could verify. The accidents followed an eerie rhythm. Fires struck only municipal buildings, floods damaged only ledgers, and once, during a renovation, workers uncovered a walled-off storage room filled with scorched paper fragments. The discovery was quietly handled by the family's legal team, and the room was resealed before anyone outside the council could inspect it. Each loss tightened the silence around the Blackridge history, leaving the town with a version of truth curated entirely by the very people it should have held accountable. Journalists who came to investigate the Blackridge family rarely stayed long. Some vanished entirely, others resigned abruptly, and a few left town without explanation, abandoning half-written articles and unclaimed hotel bills. It began subtly in the early 20th century, when a New York reporter arrived to document the curious lineage of civic leadership and disappeared on his second night. His notes were later found in the glove compartment of his car, parked neatly beside the river, keys still in the ignition. The police declared it an accident, though his camera film had been carefully removed. In the decades that followed, similar patterns emerged, investigative writers drawn by whispers of a political dynasty that never lost power, only to meet fates that silenced their curiosity. Local newspapers never covered these stories beyond a paragraph or two. Editors called it bad luck or fatigue, claiming that outsiders often underestimated the isolation of small towns. But those who lived there knew better. A journalist from Chicago stayed at the inn for 3 weeks in the 1950s, interviewing townspeople quietly and taking photographs of the old mansion. On his last night, witnesses saw him leaving the tavern with a man wearing a dark overcoat and a silver pin shaped like the family crest. By morning, his room was empty, his belongings packed as if he had checked out voluntarily. A telegram sent from his name arrived days later, stating he had returned home safely, but his family reported never receiving him. The handwriting on the telegram did not match his own. In more recent decades, the disappearances became less dramatic but no less chilling. Investigative bloggers reported computer malfunctions, corrupted drives, and mysteriously wiped archives after mentioning the family. One woman who ran a small true crime website claimed that she had been followed for weeks by a black sedan after publishing a story titled "The Town That Never Changed." She deleted her post within days and vanished from public view, her account scrubbed of all content. A few months later, her article was reposted anonymously under a new author's name, rewritten to portray the Blackridges as benevolent leaders. Those who dared to speak of these patterns often found themselves dismissed as conspiracy theorists, yet the fear that surrounded the subject was tangible. Even the local librarian refused to lend out certain historical volumes, insisting they were being restored indefinitely. Over time, journalists stopped coming altogether, and the town returned to its stillness. The silence that replaced their investigations was more damning than any report could have been, for it proved that whatever power the Blackridges held was strong enough to erase not just evidence, but memory itself. Rumors spoke of secret meetings held deep beneath the old town hall, gatherings that took place after midnight when the streets were silent and the clock tower had long stopped chiming. Few ever claimed to have seen these meetings, but everyone had heard of them. They were said to occur only on certain dates, nights marked by eclipses, solstices, or the anniversary of the town's founding. The light in the mayor's office would remain on long after dusk, and shadows would flicker across the frosted windows as if more than one person moved inside. Then, just before dawn, all would go dark, and by morning, a new decision would have been made: a zoning approval, a business closure, an unexpected resignation. The outcomes always favored the Blackridges, and no one could ever trace how the decisions were reached. Those who worked in the town hall described whispers echoing through the basement corridors, voices too low to understand, sometimes accompanied by the scent of burnt cedar and candle wax. The building itself was old, its foundations dating back to the late 1800s, built by the first Blackridge mayor with materials brought from his family's estate. It was said that a network of tunnels connected the hall to the mansion on the hill, allowing the family to travel unseen. Maintenance crews who entered those tunnels often refused to return, claiming the walls seemed to shift or breathe as if the stone itself had memory. When questioned, the mayor's office dismissed these stories as small-town folklore, yet the same dismissals appeared word for word in public statements for over a century, unchanged even as generations passed. The meetings were not political in nature, or at least not entirely. Old town records hinted at gatherings recorded only as sessions of continuation, held privately, with attendance lists blacked out. One former clerk who had worked there for years once confided that she had accidentally opened a file containing diagrams of a circle carved into the floor beneath the hall. The drawing was labeled council chamber, foundation level, though the current layout contained no such room. She described strange symbols etched into the stone, symbols that later matched those found on the Blackridge family crest. Days after revealing this, she left her position without notice and was never seen again. Over the years, the stories evolved, growing more sinister with each retelling. Some claimed the family gathered not to govern but to renew something: a pact, a promise, an arrangement that had begun when the town itself was founded. It was said that power in Blackridge Hollow was not granted by votes or laws but by ritual, sealed underground where no light or truth could reach. The family's patriarch had not only founded the town's first bank but also established its newspaper and funded the construction of its church, intertwining every channel of influence under his control. His power extended beyond politics; it seeped into the very systems that shaped daily life, leaving no corner of the community untouched. The bank held every mortgage, ensuring that even the most outspoken citizens were tethered by debt. The newspaper dictated what stories were told, printing flattering pieces about the Blackridge's public service while ignoring or rewriting any account that questioned their authority. The church, built on land donated by the patriarch himself, preached loyalty and obedience, its sermons gently reinforcing the idea that the town's prosperity was a divine gift delivered through the family's guidance. It was a trinity of influence, money, information, and faith all converging in one name. The first bank manager, a loyal cousin of the patriarch, personally approved every loan and foreclosure. Farmers who failed to meet payments often found their land absorbed into the Blackridge Estate, later repurposed for public projects under the mayor's direction. Businesses that opposed the families were quietly folded, while those who complied were rewarded with generous credit extensions and glowing newspaper features. It wasn't corruption in the open sense, it was control disguised as benevolence, a system so refined that few recognized it for what it was. Every transaction, every publication, every sermon functioned as a thread in the same intricate web. The newspaper office was particularly insidious. Articles were curated to maintain the illusion of choice, critical pieces appeared occasionally but always about matters that never threatened the family directly. Editorials praising the town's moral unity appeared every election season, written by editors whose salaries were quietly supplemented by family donations. When rumors of missing records or suspicious fires surfaced, the press either deflected or buried them under stories about civic pride and economic growth. The public never realized how thoroughly their perception was managed, how the truth was filtered through the Blackridge printing press before ever reaching their eyes. Even the church, a symbol of supposed sanctity, served the same purpose. The stained glass windows depicted not just biblical scenes but likenesses of the family's ancestors subtly woven among saints and prophets. The pastor, educated on a scholarship paid for by the Blackridge Endowment, often reminded the congregation that faith and gratitude to one's benefactors were the cornerstones of a righteous life. And so the town's conscience, its economy, and its truth all answered to the same authority, leaving no path untouched by the reach of the Blackridge hand. Each generation of Blackridge mayors swore an oath no one outside the family ever heard, a ritual that had persisted for over a century without witness or explanation. The ceremony was always held in the town hall, but behind closed doors, long after the public festivities had ended. On Inauguration Day, townspeople gathered to watch the formal swearing-in, the same polished words repeated for the cameras and newspapers, an oath to serve, protect, and uphold the values of the town. But those who worked within the building knew that this was only half of the ceremony. When the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, the real oath began. Only the family, a few chosen council members, and an object kept locked in the courthouse vault were present. No one outside that circle ever spoke of what took place, and those who asked were told it was merely tradition. For generations, whispers surrounded this private ritual. Janitors reported seeing candlelight flickering under the door of the chamber long past midnight. One custodian once claimed to have heard Latin phrases mixed with something older, a language he could not recognize, followed by a sound like deep, rhythmic chanting. He told his story once, nervously, at the tavern, and the next morning he was gone. His belongings were collected by strangers who never gave their names. Those who had known him said he had mentioned finding a strange black-bound book near the council archives a few days earlier, embossed with a symbol matching the family crest. Town records noted every public inauguration precisely, yet there were gaps in the documentation of what followed afterward. The mayor's journal from 1928 contained a brief entry written in trembling ink. The oath is heavier than before. The words are changing. Nothing else in the book referenced it again. Decades later, a similar note appeared in another diary kept by a Blackridge descendant. It binds deeper now. We no longer question the terms. These fragments suggested that the vow evolved with time, as if adapting to something unseen that demanded renewal through each generation. Even in the modern era, the tradition continued. Security cameras inside the courthouse were always turned off for one night every 4 years under the pretense of electrical maintenance. Witnesses who lived near the square swore they heard the bell toll 13 times instead of 12, followed by silence that lingered through the early hours. No written version of the oath existed, and no recording had ever been made, Yet every mayor who emerged afterward carried the same distant expression, calm, restrained, and faintly haunted, as though they had pledged themselves to something far greater than public service. In the town cemetery, among the crooked stones and rusting gates, lie rows of identical headstones belonging to generations of the Blackridge family. Each bears the same carved crest, a coiled serpent encircling an open eye, and the same chilling inscription, * we serve still. * The phrase has become part of local legend, repeated in hushed tones by children daring one another to walk past the family plot after dark. No one knows who first chose the words, but their presence on every grave gives the unsettling impression that death, for the Blackridges, is not an ending but a continuation. Even in decay, they remain united, bound to whatever legacy has governed their bloodline for over a century. The cemetery itself sits on the northern edge of town, a stretch of ground that always seems colder than the rest. The grass grows unevenly there, and the trees above the Blackridge section remain bare longer into spring, as though even nature hesitates to disturb the stillness. The family plot is enclosed by wrought iron fencing, its gates perpetually locked, though no one ever recalls seeing a caretaker. Every year, on the anniversary of the town's founding, fresh white lilies appear on the graves, placed with precise symmetry, their stems perfectly trimmed. No one claims responsibility, and the flowers never seem to wilt, even in the harshest winters. Locals have grown accustomed to it, treating the phenomenon as another piece of the town's quiet unease. Visitors who have entered the cemetery after dusk describe strange sensations. Some report hearing the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the fog when no one else is present. Others speak of whispers carried by the wind, reciting fragments of the same phrase etched in stone. Photographs taken near the graves often develop with distortions, streaks of light where none existed, or blurred shapes hovering near the edges of the frame. A historian once noted that the epitaph * we serve still * appeared nowhere in the Blackridge family's documented history, not in letters, sermons, or speeches, suggesting its meaning was reserved for those who had taken the family's private oath. The positioning of the graves forms a pattern that mirrors the layout of the town itself, each headstone aligned with streets named after the family's ancestors. From above, the arrangement resembles a sigil, circular, intricate, and deliberate. Whether by design or coincidence, it gives the sense that even in death, the Blackridges maintain their dominion, their resting place serving as both monument and map. The townspeople rarely linger there long. The silence feels heavy, charged with something that watches from below, and the carved words seem less like remembrance and more like a promise that the Blackridges, in one way or another, continue to serve. A former council clerk once claimed to have seen a book known only as * the Ledger of Lineage *, a volume whispered about for decades but never confirmed to exist. According to her account, it was stored in a locked drawer within the mayor's private office, bound in dark leather so aged it appeared almost fossilized. The spine bore no title, only the Blackridge crest burned into the cover with metallic ink that shimmered faintly under light. When she accidentally came across it while retrieving documents for an audit, she expected to find family records or genealogies. Instead, the pages were filled not with names of citizens or voters, but of individuals marked by strange annotations, dates, symbols, and occasional Latin phrases. The handwriting changed across the pages, suggesting multiple authors over generations, all contributing to the same meticulous record. What disturbed her most was the column labeled * balance. * each name had a note beside it, either a check mark, an unfinished line, or an emblem resembling a circle divided in two. Some entries were crossed out entirely, while others glowed faintly under the lamp's reflection, as if the ink had absorbed something beyond pigment. At first, she thought it might be an old bookkeeping log, but the names corresponded to people who had vanished under mysterious circumstances throughout the town's history, former officials, dissenters, even children of families who had spoken against the Blackridges. The deeper she read, the more she realized that the ledger wasn't tracking wealth or debt in any ordinary sense, it was accounting for lives. Terrified, she tried to return the book to where she'd found it, but the mayor entered the office unexpectedly. His reaction was calm yet unnatural. He simply smiled, closed the drawer, and told her that the book was for family matters. That night, she confided in a friend, describing what she had seen, and by morning she was gone. Her house remained unlocked, her belongings untouched, her car still parked outside. The friend later reported the disappearance to authorities, but no record of an investigation was ever filed. Weeks later, a new clerk quietly replaced her, and no one mentioned her name again. Since then, the ledger of lineage has become the town's most whispered secret, an object both feared and sought after. Some say it still rests in the same drawer, its pages updating themselves in invisible ink whenever the family's influence is threatened. Others believe it is no longer kept in the town hall at all but hidden beneath the mansion, where the line between genealogy and sacrifice has long since vanished. Throughout the town's history, every independent printing press that ever attempted to expose the Blackridge family's influence met the same fate: fire. The first occurred in 1914, when a small local publisher prepared to release a pamphlet questioning how the same family had held public office for 3 consecutive generations. The night before printing, flames engulfed the building, destroying not only the press but the surrounding shops. Investigators cited a faulty gas line, though witnesses swore they had seen men in dark coats leaving the alley moments before the explosion. The publisher and his apprentice were found unharmed but left town within days, abandoning their business entirely. The official report concluded it was an accident, yet no one in the community truly believed it. Decades later, a new generation of printers tried again. In 1949, a journalist from the next county partnered with a local press to print a serialized exposé about the town that never changed. He disappeared 2 nights before the first issue was to go to print, and the warehouse caught fire the following morning. Only the presses were destroyed, the offices and nearby homes remained untouched. The insurance claim was processed unusually fast, signed by the mayor himself, and within weeks the site was cleared, rebuilt, and purchased by a company affiliated with the Blackridge Estate. The townspeople began to call such incidents purifications, as if the town itself rejected any attempt to speak ill of its rulers. Even modern times offered no exception. In 1976, a university student conducting research on political dynasties claimed to have uncovered proof of electoral tampering dating back 50 years. She had arranged to print her findings in a local paper's special report, but the print shop caught fire the same night the article was submitted. The student survived but was later found wandering near the outskirts of town, incoherent, her notes missing. When asked what had happened, she said only, "They don't burn paper, they burn memory." Each fire was followed by silence, a pattern too precise to dismiss. The surviving presses that printed only sanctioned content, town bulletins, sermons, and mayoral speeches, operated without issue for decades. The few that dared stray toward truth always met the same end. Strangely, the official archives hold photographs of every fire except the most recent one. That file, like so many others in Blackridge Hollow, is missing from record. The last known photograph, faded and grainy, shows the remains of a printing plate half melted yet still legible enough to read the headline it was meant to print, *the power that cannot be voted out*. By the late 1980s, whispers about the Blackridge family began to resurface, not through newspapers or public outcry, but through an unexpected source, the church choir. The Blackridge family had always presented themselves as devout patrons of the town's main cathedral, donating to every restoration and ensuring their family pew remained untouched since the 1800s. But according to accounts from former choir members, the church's basement held more than hymn books and relics. Beneath the chapel floor lay a locked crypt accessible only to members of the clergy and, curiously, the current mayor at any given time. The choir often rehearsed late into the night, and several members reported hearing strange sounds echoing through the stone floors, not the creak of old timber, but rhythmic chanting, low and deliberate, as though rehearsed in an ancient tongue. One former member, who later left town, claimed that during one late-night rehearsal, the chapel doors swung open and the mayor himself entered, flanked by 2 councilmen. They descended into the crypt carrying what looked like an urn, their voices rising in a slow, almost ceremonial cadence. When the group returned, their hands were covered in soot or ash, and none of them spoke a word. The next day, the choir director abruptly cancelled all future evening practices, explaining only that nighttime was no longer suitable for worship. Rumors began to spread of a private ritual the Blackridge men performed every election year, a so-called covenant of continuance. Some said it was symbolic, a way to honor their ancestors and seek divine favor for leadership. Others believed it was older, darker, and less about faith than about preservation. Every new mayor reportedly spent an hour alone in the crypt before taking the oath of office, emerging pale, silent, and unshakably composed. Town officials dismissed the stories as superstition, yet none could explain why the church bell always rang 13 times on inauguration nights, a detail that had no liturgical basis. Over time, the clergy who had served under multiple Blackridge administrations retired early or relocated without explanation. Their replacements, often younger and less familiar with the town's peculiar traditions, avoided questions about the crypt altogether. Attempts to document the space or view its records were denied under the pretext of sacred confidentiality. Today, the door remains sealed, marked by an ornate brass plaque bearing the family crest and a Latin inscription translating roughly to "through us, the line endures." Choir members who still live nearby refuse to speak of what they heard below the chapel, though one, when asked about it years later, replied simply, "That wasn't worship, that was inheritance." By the early 2000s, the town's expansion led to construction projects reaching areas long untouched by modern development, including a parcel of land once owned by the Blackridge Estate. Developers intended to convert the overgrown property into a civic park, unaware that beneath the ivy and collapsed stone walls lay the remnants of the family's oldest structure, the original Merrill Manor, built in 1829 and abandoned after a mysterious fire in the 1880s. As excavators began clearing debris, they unearthed what appeared to be an old foundation chamber sealed by layers of brick and tar. Within hours of the discovery, the project was halted by an emergency order from the town council citing historical preservation. But witnesses on site described something far stranger. Workers who descended into the chamber before the order arrived reported a low humming sound, like wind trapped in a hollow, and a faint odor of iron and smoke that grew stronger the deeper they went. One of the workers, an equipment operator named Hal Perrin, claimed to have found a staircase leading to a sub-basement lined with decaying shelves. On those shelves were dozens of glass jars filled with dark sediment and labeled with dates spanning nearly 2 centuries. Some bore names, faded but legible, matching figures from the town's earliest records, including political opponents and known critics of the Blackridge family. Perrin took photographs on his phone, but later that night, his device malfunctioned, displaying only static where the images should have been. He mentioned it once to a local reporter, but before the story could be published, Perrin disappeared. His car was found near the construction site, engine still running, doors unlocked, no sign of struggle. When the site reopened weeks later, the chamber had been resealed, this time under reinforced concrete. The town officially reclassified the area as a heritage conservation zone, forbidding any future excavation. Strangely, the developers received compensation well above their projected losses, paid from a municipal account connected to the mayor's office. Residents who lived nearby began to report unusual activity after the closure, flickering lights in the empty lot, the hum of machinery at odd hours, and, on certain foggy nights, the faint toll of a bell even though no structure remained to produce it. The only surviving trace of the event came from a leaked planning document showing an annotation next to the lot's coordinates. In the margins, written in red ink and initialed with a distinctive B, were the words, "Do not disturb the ledger stones. They still breathe." By 2013, the town had changed on the surface. Modern storefronts, digital billboards, and suburban sprawl had crept into what was once a quiet, insular place. Yet beneath the sheen of progress, the Blackridge presence persisted, woven into every administrative system. That year, a data analyst employed by the municipal government began reviewing archival files for a transparency initiative meant to digitize old records. Her task was simple: scan, catalogue, and upload historical documents. But within weeks, she uncovered patterns that should not have existed: anomalies in census data, death certificates, and voting registries that all pointed to the same conclusion. The same surnames reappeared every few decades, attached to new individuals who shared uncanny similarities with those long deceased. Photographs separated by nearly a century revealed faces that were nearly identical, differing only in minor details: a different hairstyle, a modern suit, but the same sharp eyes and angular jawline characteristic of the Blackridge bloodline. At first, she believed the repetition was an error in record-keeping. But when she cross-referenced fingerprints from archived employment documents, the results returned exact matches between people supposedly generations apart. She presented her findings to her supervisor, who instructed her to refrain from further inquiries outside of her assigned scope. Days later, her access credentials were revoked, and her workstation was wiped clean. She attempted to contact state auditors, but her emails bounced back, flagged as undeliverable. Within a month, she resigned and left town. Before leaving, she anonymously sent a flash drive containing fragments of her discovery to a regional journalist. The journalist's home was burglarized days later, and the drive was never recovered. Rumors about her findings spread quietly among locals who distrusted the administration. Some speculated that the Blackridge family had perfected a form of generational continuation, whether through manipulation of identity, falsification of records, or something far less natural. The official narrative claimed that the recurring names were merely a product of honoring family heritage. Yet no one could explain why no official birth certificates for several family members existed in state archives, only baptismal records signed by clergy tied to the same cathedral beneath which the crypt was sealed. The analyst's disappearance marked another unspoken rule in the town: information itself was now a threat. Those who sought to document the past found it rewriting itself. And as one anonymous note reportedly left on her office desk read, in neat cursive on town stationery, "The record endures, even when the keeper does not." In 2019, a filmmaker from out of state arrived in the town with the intent to document its peculiar political history, drawn by the improbable fact that every mayor in living memory had shared the same surname, Blackridge. He introduced himself as a historical documentarian, focusing on forgotten American dynasties, and was granted limited permission to film the town square, the old courthouse, and public archives. At first, residents were polite but guarded, offering polite refusals when asked about the family. The filmmaker noticed something peculiar. Whenever he mentioned the name Blackridge aloud, the tone of the room shifted, as if invisible air had thickened. A local librarian told him, half-jokingly, that if he truly wanted to understand the town's history, he should visit the mayor's mansion at dusk, when the house decides whether you're worth remembering. Intrigued, he sought permission to film exterior shots of the mansion, which stood on the hill overlooking the entire town. His request was approved faster than expected, accompanied by a handwritten note from the mayor's office inviting him for tea to discuss his project. That evening, he recorded a few sequences near the wrought iron gates before being escorted inside by a quiet man who introduced himself as the estate caretaker. The footage from that visit was the last material ever recovered from his camera. Days later, the filmmaker's vehicle was found abandoned near the river, doors open, his camera gear missing except for one damaged SD card lodged inside a cracked lens case. When technicians restored partial data, they found fragments of audio, footsteps echoing on marble floors, a faint humming sound, and a voice repeating what sounded like a prayer or incantation in Latin. The final 30 seconds captured a man's voice, low and steady, saying, "You've seen enough. This story writes itself now." After that, the recording cut to static. Authorities dismissed the disappearance as a voluntary departure, citing that his production company had already received funding for another documentary. Yet those who had met him in town claimed he had grown increasingly unsettled in the days before he vanished, describing sleepless nights and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Several locals reported seeing unfamiliar figures near his rented home, all wearing dark coats and hats despite the summer heat. His car keys were later mailed anonymously to the police station, wrapped in a page torn from an old town registry, one listing the names of all previous mayors, ending not with a date, but with a blank space beside the title next in line. As the echoes of this unsolved mystery dissolve into the depths of forgotten time, remember, history never truly sleeps. It waits, watching, buried beneath the dust and the silence. Subscribe to *Secrets of History*, and step with us beyond the veil, where every artifact hides a heartbeat and every whisper carries a truth long denied. Activate the bell, and when the past calls again, you'll be the first to hear its voice.